The first one is just about the morality of finance. I've been talking about this here and again, but let me say a little bit more about that in concluding. My second theme is hopelessness. There's a tendency for people to think that at some level, because of the world's problems, it's all hopeless anyway. I don't think it is. Well, I'll come to tell you what I mean by that. Then thirdly, I just want to say something about financial theory. Then to come back to another theme, which is wealth and poverty, which I've talked about a lot. Then the world of the next century. And I think one trend we'll see is the democratization of finance, that finance will become much more of an integral part of our lives in a new information technology enriched world. And then lastly, I'll say something about your career, whether it's in finance or in something completely different. But I'm thinking that a good chance it has something to do with finance. Okay. So let me start, though, with the first thing, which is about morality. I have actually the two optional readings I have on this part of the reading list are both about morality. And one is the book by Unger called Living High and Letting Die. I think it's a dramatically well-written book. But on the first page of the book, he refers you to UNICEF, which actually his book was written before the web got popular. The book is 1994, I think. 1996. He could have referred to the web, but he gave the address. UNICEF is the United Nations, what does the I stand for? Children's Educational Fund. But what's the I? Can someone tell me? They don't actually emphasize what it spells out. It's the United Nations Fund for Children of the world. And that's their website. So he opens the book by saying, why don't you get out your checkbook right now and mail in $100 to unicef.org, because the estimate as of 1996 is that UNICEF can save a child's life for $3. So you will save the lives of 33 children for your $100 check. How can they do that? How can they save a life? I think maybe he's referring to things like vaccination programs, things that are really cheap that some children are not getting. And so statistically, you can save a child's life for $3. So he says write out a check. But of course, I can tell you what to do, and that is just log on to that and get out your credit card. And I don't know if you can save 33 lives with $100, but maybe you can. So when I first read the book, I thought about that, and then I turned the page, as most of us do. And I realized later that a month later, that I'd never written out a $100 check. So I finally did it. And I went on to unicef.org, and I gave exactly $100 as he called for. Then I started, that was thought-provoking to think about that, because why did I stop at $100? Why is it that most of us don't do that? There are intellectual defenses we have. We think of ourselves as good people. But if you were to see a dying child, right, you would emotionally be driven to do something, if there was something you could do, right? But somehow when they're not visible to us, we don't take action to make them visible. What the book consists of, Unger's book consists of, is an analysis of all the excuses we give for not doing it, for not doing that sort of thing. So living our comfortable lives and letting other people die. And I think it's really an interesting book because it is referring to a paradox of human behavior. I think of this as at the juncture of philosophy and psychology. And now those two departments are starting to I understand, I'm not in either one of them, but are starting to come together because they're realizing that philosophical issues are related to psychological issues. Let me go on to the second theme that I said I would talk about, and that is hopelessness. A lot of people from their education get the idea that ultimately there's nothing we can really do. This is one of Unger's. Unger talks about rationalizations we give for not being moral. And he calls it futility as a rationalization. Ultimately, there's always going to be starving people in the world. And I could try to help this child, but something is going to get him later. And so there's no point. If you have that kind of futility, sense of futility, it can justify any amount of hedonism. But I think that the classic article on that lends most people to that sense of futility, and I assume you know about this already, but it's Malthus, 1798, his essay on, well, the title of it was Essay on the Principle of Population. So Thomas Malthus wrote about the population problem. It was such a celebrated essay that he went through 6 editions of it. But I'm going to quote from the first edition just to remind you. He said in 1798, population, when unchecked, increased in a geometrical ratio, and subsistence for man in an arithmetical ratio. So the population growth follows an exponential growth curve. He says geometrical, but goes like that. Whereas he said, at best, the increase in our ability to produce is linear, or he calls that arithmetical. And so population will run off with all of our resources. There's nothing we can do. Population will continue to put pressure on our resources. He says, I'm quoting again from his 1798 essay, population, when unchecked, goes on doubling itself every 25 years. In the next, if you go through 2 25-year periods where there was no check on population growth, it is impossible, I'm quoting him, to suppose that the produce could be quadrupled. It would be contrary to all our knowledge of the qualities of land. And then he comes now to his dismal law of economics. He didn't call it that. I'm quoting, but I will quote him. No possible form of society could prevent the almost constant action of misery upon a great part of mankind, if in a state of inequality, and upon all, if all were equal. So that the natural state of humankind is bordering on starvation and dying. And the force of his argument was quite profound, because it was hard to argue against him that there's nothing you can do about it. That's just it. And all the theorizing of people can only result in a world where more people are suffering and dying. The third topic I was saying I would talk about is, maybe I'll be brief about this, the importance of financial theory. I'm an advocate of 2 seemingly disparate things, and you know this from this course. One of them is mathematical finance. We spent some time on it, but not very much, because there's another course that's also on Open Yale that John Acopoulos has on mathematical finance. But I think the other side of it is behavioral finance, which is a particular passion of mine. And behavioral finance is the application of psychology and other social sciences to finance. And I think that the two actually work together symbiotically, and we should consider them together. Some people in mathematical finance are very opposed to behavioral finance because it kind of muddles their world. But in fact, I think they should consider it their salvation, because without behavioral finance, they're kind of bordering on irrelevant. You have to consider things in a broader context and think of the interruptions and problems that are caused. So I said the next topic I would talk about today is, I've already been talking about it a bit, is about wealth and poverty. It seems to me it's fundamentally connected with our thoughts about finance, because I've referred to this problem before, that people think that people who go into finance are money grubbers. They want to make money. They don't have human feelings or something like that. There's also this sense that we're living in a world that's increasingly plutocratic, that the wealthy people are controlling the world. That was a theme that took a lot of impetus in the 19th century with Karl Marx, who said exactly that. And in some sense, it's coming back, maybe in not such an extreme form. So Jacob Hacker, who's in our political science department, and Paul Pearson, who's at Stanford University, have a new book that just came out called Winner Take All Politics. And that book is about, they have a claim in that book that the world is getting more polarized by the political power of financial institutions. Basically, they have something they call the 30 Years' War. What's the 30 Years' War? You might think it's something that happened in the 17th century. Not for them. The 30 Years' War is the war against the people of the world fought by the financial community in the halls of Congress and Parliament by lobbying. So they argue that the companies have gotten more and more sophisticated in lobbying governments to fulfill their ambitions. And so the income inequality that we're seeing increasing, particularly in the United States, but elsewhere in the world, is a consequence of this. So Hacker and Pearson say much of the literature on income inequality says it has something to do with the information revolution, which is eliminating jobs for low-income people, and the increasing importance of education, which rewards college graduates at the expense of uneducated people. But they say that the real increase in inequality has not been between high school graduates and college graduates. It's between the whole population and the top 1/10%. There is this small community of super rich people that are developing who are very adept at lobbying governments. This is a trend that's developing. Well, I think if they are, to some extent, they are probably right. I think maybe they overstate that, but I think it's a concern. But I think that we do have democratic institutions, and we can respond to that. That brings us to what I said was the democratization of finance. And this is a theme of my own that I've been emphasizing. So the democratization of finance is sort of trying to make it move beyond the cosmopolitan class. Okay? So cosmopolitans know how to get things done, how to raise capital, and they know how to manage their risks so they don't get into trouble. Inequality is substantially due to a failure to manage risks. And so right? I mean, some inequality is due to fundamental things, like someone is talented and can make more money. But it's also due to random things that are not controlled. Notably, in the current financial crisis, we saw a huge drop in home values. And we saw people who bought homes at the top of the market, and then they find that their mortgages are worth more than their homes are. And so they have a negative net worth. They're in trouble. They would be bankrupt. Maybe they're not bankrupt yet, but they're verging on that. They're very unhappy. This was a failure, I think, of bringing finance to the people. So it's not democratizing finance. We haven't finished democratizing finance. So, it's kind of chaotic the way things work for most people. Most people who, A, do not have a lawyer, B, do not have a financial advisor, C, do not have an accountant, all right? Or maybe they go to some, storefront tax-paying service, but that's as far as they go. And these people make a mess of their lives. So, for example, we have laws that allow people to go bankrupt and wipe off their debts. All you have to do, if you are in trouble, financial trouble, is go to a lawyer and say, can you help me file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy? I'd like to wipe out all my debts. But usually you have to have $1,000 to pay the lawyer to help you do this. And these people can't get it together to do that. So what happens? What happens to this typical person who's uneducated, has gotten deeply in debt? What do you think happens? Do they ever declare bankruptcy? No. What do? They stop answering the phone because they're getting these dunning calls from creditors. And so the creditors then, it's called informal bankruptcy. They will go to court and ask the judge to allow them to garnish the wages of the person who won't pay and won't answer the phone. So they'll take another deduction from the person's paycheck eventually. The person never figures it out. His paycheck just went down and he's paying off his debt. What a mess. But that's because of the failure of financial institutions to handle things well. Your career, because you are young people and you may be wondering what you want to do. I think that maybe have reflected on this before. You probably feel that you want to do something important, and you want a sort of perfect career, something that tells a story, makes a story of your life, and ultimately serves for good causes. But it's when you read Unger, you don't get an inspiration like that, right? He says, write a check right now to UNICEF. Well, I can do that, but it seems unrewarding just to give to charity. I can just live like a monk, right? I could take a job at a hamburger joint, right, and then give all my money away to UNICEF. Some of that doesn't feel right, because I think that you know that you have abilities and you want to see them flourish, and you want to. That's why I think you shouldn't be flipping hamburgers and giving the money away. That's not what you should be doing now. Instead, it would be learning things that make it possible to do good works. I don't know what is the perfect career. I mean, I mentioned Paul Allen or Bill Gates. Bill Gates, I shouldn't give you an example of dropping out of college, but he dropped out of college. And by the way, you should do that if you have a Microsoft-size idea. But I think I've said this before. I don't know, what is the perfect career? I'll give you another example. Muhammad Yunus, you've heard of him, who he went to a PhD program at Vanderbilt University, got his PhD in 1969, became an assistant professor of economics at Middle Tennessee State University. But then the big thing that he did is he went back to Bangladesh and founded the Grameen Bank. The Grameen Bank, which specialized in making microfinance loans in Bangladesh, and that was in '76. Grameen apparently means of the village in Bengali. But what he did is he conceived of a new way of making loans to very low-income people. Banks before Yunus didn't have much interest in lending to low-income people because the costs of administering the loans seemed to be too high relative to what you could get back. But he had a scheme for getting people to pay back the loans. Often they would make loans to women in groups, impoverished women, but he would lend to the whole group and say that the whole group is jointly liable to the debt. That's the only way we'll make it. And it's for business, for starting a business, like getting a wheeled cart where you could sell food on the street, some simple, low business like that. You can't do it unless you get a little bit of capital, enough to buy the cart and buy the first food to start selling. And these women can't get that capital. But when he makes it available to them as a group, they then interact with each other and enforce the good behavior of each other, and it's a system that worked. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. It was not the prize in economics, it was the prize in peace. So that's an example of the kind of careers that I think some of you might think about. So I think that in looking forward to your own careers, you have to think about the next 5 decades. You're going to be working, I said this before, I think, but you're going to be working for another 50 years, right? More if you enjoy it. With modern healthcare, you might live to 100, but you won't be working at 100 probably. You'll probably retire by then. Maybe not. Maybe you've got a century ahead of you. And I think that the world will change a lot over this interval of time. I think that, by the way, information technology will be changing so many things that we do in ways that we can't see. And financial markets will be everywhere. So I may be presumptuous to think that some of these ideas here are likely to come about. But I've come to start to think that they're all inevitable, because we've already seen the past. We've seen how financial markets have captured more and more risks. And we have such an advance in our technology that it really ought to be big changes that will come. So I guess what you have to do is maintain a century-long personal outlook.